Welcome to Buzz Around the Globe. French President Emmanuel Macron triggered a shockwave in Europe by refusing to rule out the dispatch of Western ground troops to Ukraine in its fight against the Russian invasion. But what compelled Macron to do so? He had hosted a conference of European leaders recently seeking to rally greater support for Kyiv, which is facing increasing battlefield challenges and dwindling munition stocks. He painted a grim picture of Russia under President Vladimir Putin, arguing there had been a change of posture even in the last months that had seen a hardening of its stance both domestically and in Ukraine. Macron said that nothing can be excluded to pursue our objective. Russia cannot and must not win this war. Macron said this after the conference at the gathering of European leaders, even while there was no consensus on the sending of Western ground troops to Ukraine. Macron had refused to say more about France's position, citing the need for strategic ambiguity. Macron's eagerness to present himself as a European champion of Ukraine's cause is amid growing fears that American support could wane in the coming months. That's why he tried to implore Europe by saying it's our future, that is the Europe's future, that is at stake. He wants to ensure action, keeping the possibility of withdrawal of America's support in mind. There are growing doubts about the viability of long-term US backing for Ukraine as a new aid package struggles to find legislative approval, and Donald Trump, who has indicated opposition to further support for Kyiv, eyes a return to the presidency in elections this year. But Macron insisted that Europe should not wait for the result of the elections, where Trump is expected to face off against President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, the White House said on Tuesday that the United States would not send troops to fight in Ukraine. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, when asked whether the United States could send troops for other purposes, such as training, said that the Biden administration opposed any deployment to Ukraine.
Certainly every country is free to speak to its own interests, but in addition to the president making clear that the U.S. will not send any troops to fight in Ukraine, the NATO Secretary General has ruled out any NATO troops to fight in Ukraine.
Macron was criticized at home, but French Prime Minister and then the French Foreign Minister reconfirmed Macron's statement. The Foreign Minister said Western nations could engage in demining, arms production and operations in the cyber field on Ukrainian soil without breaching any belligerence threshold. The Czech Premier, meanwhile, said there was great support for an initiative to help Ukraine to buy munitions outside the EU. Dutch Prime Minister also said his country would contribute and others would follow. But it seemed clear that most NATO nations are not in the favor of sending in Western troops.
Poland is not considering sending troops to Ukraine, and we have a common position on this point. It is a common stance of the prime ministers of countries that have provided Ukraine with much more aid than most others. We are not considering sending any troops to Ukraine, and I am convinced that we should instead develop the forms of support we adopted after the Russian aggression.
This announcement appeared to represent a turnaround for Macron, who has for many years sought to position himself as a top mediator between Russia and Ukraine. Less than 5 years ago, he hosted Putin at his Mediterranean residence and flew into Moscow in February 2022 in a last-minute bid to halt the dispatch of Russian troops across the border. Meanwhile, the Kremlin grimly warned Europe against even entertaining such an idea, saying that the appearance of NATO troops in Ukraine would make a direct confrontation with Russia not only possible, but inevitable. In 2022, Putin had bluntly warned the West against intervening in Russia's war against Ukraine, and Western countries have been keen to avoid an escalation. But observers note that over time, many red lines have been crossed over the Ukraine conflict, pointing to supplies of French and British long-range cruise missiles considered unthinkable almost 2 years ago.
It seems to me that those who not only express these thoughts, but even allow them into their minds, they should use their minds for more rational, safer things for Europe. For the first time in all the discussions on how to further support Ukraine, Macron, ed. French President Emmanuel Macron mentioned the creation of some kind of ninth missile coalition, which will include the supply of long-range weapons so that they reach deep into the Russian Federation, which in itself is suicidal.
Western officials acknowledge that Russia risks gaining the upper hand in the conflict this year as Ukraine runs out of weapons and ammunition. So maybe what Macron is proposing is an option if US moves out of the picture. Do tell us what you think about this video in the comment section, and for more news updates, subscribe to India Today.